welcome to the Healing Station with Dr. Davis. I'm your host, Dr. Davis. And as usual, I'm so excited about today's topic. We'll be talking about somatic therapy, and we have my girl Korisma in the building. And so I'm going to have her go ahead and introduce herself.
Hey, hello, everyone. My name is Korisma Grant. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and owner of Safe Point Counseling based in Texas, but I'm also licensed in the state of Michigan. So my practice focuses and specializes in helping people with, or specifically adults, with anxiety, depression, and trauma.
Awesome, awesome. Very important work, which of course I appreciate as a fellow therapist there. And so I'm always interested and I always like people to start with their journey into, becoming a healer, if you will. And so I want to hear like why therapy, what got you here, what influenced you, kind of hearing your
Yeah,
story there.
for sure. Well, my path was not linear at all. So if I was to go back to when I was a little girl, I actually wanted to be a lawyer.
Whoa,
And
okay.
then, so that's where I wanted to be when I was younger. And then as I got older, I thought I had interest in accounting and I wanted to be a forensic accountant. So my undergrad degree is actually in business because I was
Hmm.
planning to go that route. But towards the end of my business degree or my undergrad, I realized that I actually didn't have an interest in that. And I started to have more of an interest in people, the way they think, why do they do the things that they do. But at
Hmm.
that point, I was too far along in the degree to start all over. So I was
That's
like, I'm
real.
gonna finish this.
So I come too far to come this far. Like I'm gonna
Exactly.
have to finish this. Ain't no going back. That's
Exactly.
hilarious.
Exactly. So after I finished undergrad, I was doing some work in my hometown, and I was also going to therapy at the time. But in that point, I was also like, I know I'm interested in, working with people and all of that, but I wasn't sure how interested I was. So I decided to go abroad. So I lived abroad for a couple of years and taught English as a second language to children. And
Mm.
while I was there, that solidified my interest in working with people and getting to learn more about them, how to help them. And one of the reasons for that is so I worked in China and South Korea. So in China, I
Oh.
had a specific class, and I had this little boy that we had a hard time
Ooh.
adjusting to each other when I started teaching his class. And so, mind you, he was like 4 or 5 years old. And so,
Mm.
my assistant teacher, who spoke Chinese, she started to give me a little backstory about his family dynamics and what was going on at
Mm.
home for him. And I don't know what about that story, it started to shift how I understood him and how to work with him. Um, and we became like best buddies. He became like my little
Oh.
assistant. Like,
That's so
and the
sweet.
silly as that was. And so at that point, I also realized like I had more of an interest in learning more about people and helping them versus teaching them something like or just teaching them like a curriculum or
Yeah.
anything like that. So on top of that, I've always gotten feedback from my friends about how they experienced talking to me and being
Hmm.
around me that also had me feeling like, maybe I have just like this organic inkling or this organic way of being a therapist that I didn't even realize. So
Yeah.
at that point, while I was abroad, I applied to grad school, got in, got my degree, got licensed, and here I am now.
That's amazing. I always like hearing people's story. Normally, it's not linear. People take
Yeah,
detours and all these type of things, and so it's always interesting what you
absolutely.
thought you were going to be when you grow up,
Right.
based on what you actually became. So, what an awesome story and some amazing
Exactly.
experiences that you
Oh,
had. So,
thank
it's really
you.
cool. So I know I
Yeah.
look at you as a somatic therapy expert. And so I definitely am excited to get into the topic of somatic therapy. So before we get into that, like what really drew you to wanting to get more certifications and just more training in somatic therapy in itself?
Right. Yeah, good question. So a few years ago, there was a personal experience that I was having in my life, and there was a specific event where I noticed that when things got really heightened, my hand started to shake. Like I was like nervous,
Mm.
kind of shaking. And so as my hand started to shake, I was like, I suddenly had this. a flood of memories from a very long time ago, like maybe over 20 years ago, that I
Wow.
had forgotten all of my life. And I was like, what
Wow.
is that? Before this, my supervisor at the time, excuse me, she had just started getting into somatic work, so she told me a little bit about it. But like, and I was like, okay, that's valuable and meaningful things. But when that memory came up, when my hands started to shake, I was like, oh, I think there's more to this than what I thought.
Hmm.
So that is what piqued my interest for sure, like my own personal experience of how the body actually reminded me of something that was very much suppressed and forgotten for decades.
Man, I love that. I feel like a lot of times I don't necessarily think that you have to go through exactly what a client goes through or somebody to walk them through it, but a lot of times the work that we get passionate about is something that we've walked through
Yeah,
either personally or been very close to. And so
right.
just hearing that, I'm like, okay, that's close to the heart, so it makes sense where that
Mm-hmm.
passion comes from. So wanting, because I know what that means. I know you know what that means, but our listeners might
Mm-hmm.
not. So, what is somatic therapy? Like this term that's been
Yeah.
thrown around, somatic healing, and
Mm-hmm.
all of this. Like, how would you define somatic therapy and healing?
Yeah, for sure. So I look at somatic therapy, like that term as an umbrella term for body based or body oriented approaches and
Hmm.
treatment, right? And so my training is specifically in somatic experiencing. So that's like a category underneath somatic therapy. What I look at is how the full system of the body influences the brain, right? And so somatic experiencing in particular, it supports emotion regulation, it
Hmm.
supports crisis stabilization. It supports helping people live in the here and now versus living in flashback and or memories,
Hmm.
because they actually don't even realize they're doing it, although they are living it.
Yeah.
And it also helps renegotiate trauma. And so when I say renegotiate trauma, what I mean is it gives a different or less traumatic ending to a traumatic event.
Mm.
If I were to explain that even more, I would basically wrap that up as your autonomic nervous system gets
Hmm.
an opportunity and chance to do what it needed to do instead of being inhibited. So it gets to do what it needed to do versus but it couldn't do in
In
order
the
to
moment,
survive.
yeah. That's so good. And so, could you give like a practical example when it comes to rewriting that story? Like, what has that looked like with the client before? Or what does that look
Yeah,
like? Yeah.
for sure, for sure. So an example is, say, for example, someone needed an opportunity like to push someone or something away, or they needed to say
Hmm.
stop, right?
Yeah.
But their survival responses didn't allow them to do that, right? So in a session, we may look at the hands and the body. They're always speaking. We just don't necessarily notice them, or we ignore them. We override
Yeah.
them. We don't listen to them. So if I'm noticing something in the body as someone is telling the story, and I see something with the hands come up, or for example, I might ask them to pause. And what if we just stay there for a moment with these hands and notice what these hands want to do, right? And
Hmm.
so if these hands want to move, right, we give opportunity for them to slowly push forward, right? Because if the action was I needed to push and I couldn't, we're now giving an opportunity to push now, right? So it can complete, so your nervous system doesn't get stuck in I can't move, I can't push anymore. I actually can complete this. It's okay now. That thing has passed. I
Hmm.
can now be here in the present where I do have more options than I did in the past. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And
Okay.
I love the way that you said that because I'm like, oh, that's such powerful work. So I'm like, let's get a
Mm.
practical example. What does that look like? So that is awesome. And as you talk about
Yeah.
the nervous system in that way and how someone may not have been able to, because of that survival response, be able to
Mhm.
complete whatever action they desire in hindsight or even what they would have wanted to do in that moment,
Yeah.
it makes me think of that fight or flight response. So I
Yeah.
wanted to hear more about that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response and that survival. If you could talk more about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To talk about that, would it be okay if I also talk a little bit more about the autonomic nervous system as well?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to abbreviate that. When I say ANS, I am talking about the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so the ANS is basically, it regulates basic functions in the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's automatic. We don't control it, right? It controls the automatic functions of our body that help us survive. So
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by that, it's the breathing. Like, we don't, it's a process that we don't think about. We just breathe. It's the heart rate. We don't think about our heart beating. It just beats. It's digestion and, things like that. Those involuntary processes. So the autonomic nervous system helps and control those things, right? So the autonomic nervous system has two branches as well. There's the parasympathetic branch and the sympathetic branch. Okay, so the parasympathetic branch is basically like putting a brake on the nervous system. It helps us rest, it helps us unwind, it helps us reorganize after some sort of activation or some sort of stress or threat, right? And it does that by slowing and deepening our breath, for example. It does that by aiding us in digestion. It helps by lowering our heart rate and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So that's your parasympathetic branch, and then you have your sympathetic branch. That branch is more like the gas pedal of the nervous system. So it's getting the whole body ready for some kind of action or some type of way to survive something that's threatening or dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can actually see the sympathetic branch active when you're excited, when you're terrified, when you're engaged in physical activity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how that looks is your heart is racing faster. Um, Blood shifts from your digestive system to your muscles so you can move faster. Your eyes might dilate, right, to improve your vision, your line of sight. It may also help with focusing your eyes, like so for that hypervigilance that's getting ready. Your muscles might tense up because they're all trying to prepare you to fight, flight, or even do something fun and exciting, exercise, anything
Mm-hmm.
like that, right?
Yeah.
And essentially the parasympathetic branch and the sympathetic branch, they do the opposite things.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how this is related to your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and even tonic immobility is when there is threat or there is danger, you can move to your sympathetic branch. All right, so that branch is more of the fight or flight. Like that's your body getting ready either to like attack somebody,
Mm-hmm.
comfort them, angry outbursts, whatever that looks like. It can look like your flight, so you're getting ready to flee. You're gonna walk away, you're gonna run away, you're gonna get out of here,
Yeah.
right? Um, Even freeze, while it's that one is more of your limbic system, like that emotion center of your brain, screaming, "Don't move, or you'll die,"
Mm.
right? So it's like there's this pause, but internally, there's still a hypervigilance. Your heart still can be racing. You still can, a lot of activity can be
We
happening,
going
although
in.
your
Yeah.
body is still, right? So then we have fawn, on the other hand. And so that is more of a people pleasing, like to
Mm-hmm.
please and appease, to avoid conflict. And then flop or tonic immobility, that is literally like your limbs and your muscles go limp. Some people
Mm.
actually faint,
Yeah.
can't move. Or they may pretend that way because the nervous system believes it is safer to do this. My predator, the perpetrator, will leave me alone if they think I'm dead or if I'm
Basically.
done
Yeah.
than if I move right now, right? It also conserves energy. So when the predator does leave or the perpetrator does leave, you can get out of there as soon as possible, right? And so, what can happen when you have traumatic events, your autonomic nervous system can get stuck in one of these survival responses,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, when you get stuck there, you start living your life in a way that doesn't match with present day events. So, you're either fighting people when actually you don't need to fight them anymore,
Yeah.
or you're running away from people when you don't need to run away from them anymore, or certain people that you don't need to run away from,
Yeah.
right? You're freezing when you don't need to, etc. right? So then you're also living in flashback in that memory because you're
Mhm.
operating from a time that is not here and now, right? And so there is mental health and emotional implications of that, as well as physical and health implications of that.
Mhm.
When your nervous system is stuck in a place that it wasn't meant to be stuck in, because, oh, let me say this too, a healthy nervous system will ebb and flow. It will activate
Absolutely.
and stimulate when there is danger because that's
Mhm.
how it was created. That's what it was created to do. That's its job.
Mhm.
But then it also, a healthy one will know when that dangerous situation has passed, and then it will deactivate. And so that stimulation will go down and it'll be like, oh, okay, I can rest, right? So that's that sympathetic, parasympathetic branch thing going on.
Mhm.
However, an unhealthy nervous system or a stuck nervous system doesn't realize the scary thing or the terrifying thing has passed. So you get stuck in sympathetic, right? So that fight or flight, maybe even freeze, or you get stuck in more of that fawn or flap, the tonic immobility, right?
Mhm.
And so your nervous system is working really hard in both of those states to help you have a sense of safety.
Yeah.
So when that happens, there are physical implications like headaches, digestive issues, sleep issues, um, blood pressure, high blood pressure, etc.
Mhm.
And then mental health wise and emotionally, you can see anxiety, depression, relationship issues, difficulty getting through daily tasks and things like that, right? And so when you get stuck in these things, there are long term health and mental health implications that aren't good for us anyway.
Mhm.
So that is one of the reasons that working with the body to complete these incomplete strategies helps to reset the nervous system so it can get back to a more organic, healthy rhythm and flow of operating. It knows when it needs to activate and it can tell when it doesn't. And then it just goes on and so forth.
No, that's so good. And that's not something that a lot of people always think about, where it's
Mm,
like and this is something that comes up a lot when I'm working with clients. It's like they really think that's their personality. Like they really feel like the
yeah.
trauma response is like, I'm just like that. Like and they just want to be
Mm,
fighting and
yeah.
all. And it's like, no, your nervous system is stuck. Your
Yeah.
ANS is stuck. That's what's happening. So let's go
Exactly.
find that point where it got stuck and help it to get unstuck so that it's ebbing
Exactly.
and flowing, as you said. So I love that. And so it makes me wonder, of course, I'm curious about intervention and interventions
Yeah.
that you do,
Right.
anything that you think in particular that you're like, this is my favorite, or whatever, however you want to share.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
around fawn, because the fawn response, it probably is one of my favorite ones in the sense that, the people pleasing,
Yeah.
because a lot of people don't think of it as a trauma response.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
you're working with a client that has that fawn response, what does
Mm-hmm.
that somatic therapy look like with them? What interventions have you done, or would you even like recommend and stuff like that around that?
Sure. So one is I always slow down, regardless of where it's stuck. I slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Slowing down because oftentimes when we have traumatic events, it's because something was too much, too fast, too soon, and we want to counter that to interrupt the
Mm-hmm.
pattern of getting stuck. Right. Another piece of slowing down is that it allows for the sensations that are often ignored or overridden to be brought to your awareness. It allows for the thoughts, it allows for the feelings, it allows for how your body was actually organizing to complete something. It allows time and space for us to start to see how it's organizing
Mm-hmm.
so it can complete in a way that is fitting and that it wanted to and needed to, right? So for someone who is more of an a fawn, sometimes someone like that can look more along the freeze,
Mm-hmm.
like and they're in a freeze response. So for someone like that, I actually would do something really small and minute, but it's actually really big for the nervous system, right? So that could be something as simple as just moving your eyes. Can you move your eyes to the right as far to the right as possible, right? And as they do that, I'm also going to, and if they can stick with me and be present with me as they do that, I'm also going to be asking, well, like, what happens to your heart rate as you do that? What happens to your breathing? Does it get more shallow? Do you notice it gets deeper? Do you notice
Mm-hmm.
something else in your body starting to move, right? Because the slowing down for that allows one the person to know that I'm actually safe right now. It's okay. It's all right.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
gives them a chance to orient to what's going on in and or around them, right? And then it allows again the nervous system, like if they couldn't look to the right or to the left at the time of the event, it allows the nervous system to actually do that now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so now your breathing might shift to either something that's a little bit more regulated, or it might get more intense first. So we track the nervous system too before we move forward, or it might start to regulate. And then they might just notice more mobility at that point. Like I can do a little something else. I can turn my whole head, not just my eyes, right? They
Mm-hmm.
become a little bit more aware. They might even notice something in the room that they, has been here the whole time, but they've
They
just
didn't see
decided to come.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's an indication that they're a little bit more here and now. So that is an example of something that I would do with someone that's a little bit more fawn,
Mm-hmm.
as well as see if there are any thoughts or beliefs or feelings that come up as their eyes are in this one direction or another.
That's really good.
Because usually when we're in one of these branches of our nervous system, there is a whole story that's going on, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
belief about ourselves, about people around us. There
Mm-hmm.
are feelings like I'm terrified, and I can't say I'm terrified. I can't do anything. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so we get to now name those things, right? And give them their appropriate place, let them complete, and then differentiate between, hey, but here and now in 2024, this isn't that, right? This is something else. I'm an adult now. I was a kid then. I actually can move. I actually, you know what I mean? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And some, it's very interesting to see how organically even people's beliefs about themselves, like they'll just say things that reflect truth or more truth than they did when they were stuck in their freeze or response. So it's not even like I have to tell them like, oh no, blah, blah, blah. It just comes out and I'm like, yes, you got it. Like,
There you go.
yeah,
There you go.
exactly. Exactly. So that can be an example of um, working with fawn.
No, that's really good. Thank you. I wanted to get it practical. And I'm like, okay, let me pick one of these and
Yeah.
go and give an example there. And so, of course, being that this is the healing station, I always have to ask,
Mhm.
how are we incorporating faith with this? And especially around somatic therapy. I know there are
Mhm.
several versions, and some people can be turned off, honestly, by somatic therapy because of
Mhm.
a lot of somatic therapists will add on like new age practices and other
Yeah.
things that are not um, Christian based or
Yeah.
faith based in that way. And so I want to, I know you are a Christian and you are a
Mhm.
believer. And so
Yeah.
as you do this work, I know you bring your faith into all that you do. And so I'm wondering,
Mhm.
as doing this work in somatic therapy, how have you been able to bring those two together and what does that look like in your work?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing for me is that I think is important. Like as much as I possibly can, I like to start my session before I even jump on the call or meet with a person, like in prayer, just asking the Lord to just have His way in the
Mm-hmm.
session, um, and do what I can't do, which is everything. So,
Basically.
yes, I ask them to help me see what I can't see with my natural eyes, um, and that He just guides and controls the session.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece is, I do consider, the work as a therapist as there's spiritual work in there, right? Because if we look at ourselves as we're a spirit, we have a soul, and we live in a body, right?
Absolutely.
If we are a spirit, then we're interacting with another spirit every time we talk to someone, every time we see
Mm-hmm.
someone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so there's also the spiritual component to being a therapist. And so I need the Lord to direct me in
Mm-hmm.
these interactions. The other piece is recognizing that I personally believe that the Lord created our autonomic nervous system.
Absolutely.
He
Mm-hmm.
created it with mechanisms to help us survive scary, terrifying, and dangerous situations. Um, but I don't think He made it for us to stay there, right? He made it for us to, for those mechanisms to work when we need them, and then for them to like relax when we don't need them anymore, when the
Mm-hmm.
situation has passed. And so, um, a part of the work that I do is considering like how does, like, if the Lord came that we may have life and have it more abundantly, but if we're stuck, we're not living abundantly. How do we
This is
move
real.
from that to, one place to another, right? So that's another way that I can like incorporate faith into the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
I also think about how, like, if God made our whole bodies, He wants us to be whole, right? It's like your body has information, it tells a story. Yes, our cognitive and verbal stories have so much value and so much information, and so do our bodies. But we tend to override and ignore them. But I think when you get an opportunity to hear what your body is saying, it also gives an opportunity for you to give whatever is coming up to the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a chance to maybe see something that you naturally would just ignore because we don't necessarily learn to listen to what our body has to say. But if
Yeah.
we ignore it, it's kind of like closing the door to something that God may want to open, right? For Him to heal us and to do whatever work He sees fit in that case. Um, and I'm trying to think, is there anything else or any other ways that I incorporate faith? I would say, like with a client, like, for my clients who are believers, we use God, the source, as a resource in the session,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so sometimes when someone has had a traumatic event and they were all alone and they needed someone or something and there was no one there, right? We bring the Lord into the session, right? Like, what does He have to say to you about this? Is there something He has to say? Is there some form of affection He wants to give you? Do you need a hug? What if you imagine Him hugging you right now? What happens inside in that case, right?
Yeah.
So also using our source as a resource to help people heal as well is another way that I incorporate faith into the work that I do. Um, and I don't know, I think that kind of sums up
No, that's
how I
really
do that.
good. Even as you were talking about the wholeness part, because when I think about healing and God's desire and will for all of us to be healed, trauma and a lot of these experiences, they leave the soul compartmentalized or
Yes,
shattered in ways. And
exactly.
so when you were talking about that, I was like, absolutely. And
Mm-hmm.
when we approach, we know that the trauma causes us to be fragmented. And
Mm-hmm.
as those who are helping with the process of healing,
Mm-hmm.
we have to see it as like helping the person become whole and also look at the whole person. So that's
Yeah.
why it's important for us to
Mm-hmm.
do the mind, body, and the spirit work. Because,
Right.
like you said, some people may not agree, but we are spiritual beings nonetheless.
Yeah.
And this spirit does continue even when our
Yeah.
body does is
Mm-hmm.
returns to the dust. So that
Yeah.
I love that you said that. And so as you were
Mm-hmm.
thinking, I was like, that's a requirement in the healing is going through to become whole, basically, and to take those shattered pieces and bring it back into whole. So I
Exactly.
appreciate you for
Exactly.
saying that.
Yeah, for sure. For
So
sure.
I have loved like just how you've been able to break down the ANS, and
Mm-hmm.
also just like the responses and all of that good stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping as the listeners listen, they're like, oh, I want to learn more. And of course, could always hit you up if they're looking for some somatic therapy. So,
Absolutely.
any last minute tips or advice or just words of wisdom, whatever it is that you want to share with people around this, and leave them with before we wrap up today?
Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest thing is listen to your body. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that, I'm going to clarify what I mean by that because sometimes our body can be impulsive, and so that doesn't necessarily mean just do whatever your body says do. What I
That's
really
real.
mean,
Okay, hold on. Wait, hold on. Some of y'all gonna take that too literal. We might have a problem. We might have a problem.
Yes. So, what I mean by listen is learning to hear the story of your nervous system. You might not act on the impulse, you might not do everything that it says to do, but you at least know that, hey, it's trying to get my attention and there's some information here for me that could be
Mm-hmm.
helpful. This could be helpful in my healing. This could be helpful in my day to day interactions with my family or friends. This could be helpful because the Lord might be revealing something to me about myself that He wants to work in and through and about. So, like, learning to hear that just your verbal and your thoughts are all great, and so is your body's story,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, not just overriding it when your heart is racing, but you're like, no, I'm fine, but you're freaking out inside. Like, what if you were to be like, well, actually, my body is saying that I'm a little bit scared right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because then that could move you to reaching out to someone that may be supportive. It could move you to some sort of self regulation technique. It could move you to the Lord, right? For Him to now help you with your fear, right? And so then you're actually addressing the underlying issue and not ignoring it and running past it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same things will keep coming up and up again. So I would say definitely learn just to hear the nervous system, right? Your body is not trying to hurt you. It was created to help you. It's a
Absolutely.
part of you, right? That's a part of what makes you whole. It has value. And so treat it that way.
Absolutely. I love that.
um, yeah,
And I really feel
yeah,
like we can learn a lot from slowing down and
right.
listening to our body in that way. And just that's
Absolutely.
beautiful. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much for sharing with
Yeah,
us today. I just love it.
absolutely.
And so I'm hoping that you all are that are listening. First of all, thank you as always. And I'm hoping that today's conversation really helps to just spark more interest in on your healing journey and just really helping you through. And of course, I will be see you all next week for another episode. I love you as always. Let's continue to heal together. Bye.